many people have lifted me up and have given me a helping hand in my career, and I wouldn't be here without them. And so the more I can do to kind of, pull up the next generation, the more I will do. And that's what teaching is all about, right?
You're listening to Parallel Careers, where writers who also teach share the big ideas and practical tips that they take into the classroom.
My name's Kathy Friedman. I live in the West End of Toronto, and I'm a writer of fiction and creative nonfiction. I also teach creative writing in the Open Education Department at the University of Guelph, and I'm the co-founder of Inkwell Workshops as well as the artistic director. So my first creative writing teaching gigs came about through Workman Arts, which is an interdisciplinary arts organization for artists with lived experience, mental health and addictions. And I happened to go to an event that they were putting on about creativity and madness. This was back in 2013. And I went with my friend Euphemia Fantetti to this event. And I just had this light bulb moment when I heard about Workman Arts and the work that they were doing and the way that they were pairing sort of community with mental health, with the arts. I went up to one of the speakers after the event and I just almost like shook her, and I was just like, tell me about Workman Arts, how can I get involved? Because this is everything that I want to do. It was I wanted to teach, and I wanted to be able to put sort of my own anti-oppression values into practice. And I ran about 3 writing workshops with them. In 2015, I got hired to teach a short fiction class at the University of Guelph, and Euphemia was also hired to teach a creative nonfiction class there. And so it was basically like, as soon as we had that teaching experience under our belt, we felt like we could apply to the Ontario Arts Council, the Toronto Arts Council, to start Inkwell. And we started looking for a community partner and then started the process of grant writing. We run free drop-in creative writing workshops every week for people with lived experience. Right now we're running them on Zoom. Previously we were running them out of Roots, which is close to Dufferin and Eglinton. And we try to have as few barriers to participation as possible. So registration can be a barrier, for example. We're free. We give out snacks and TTC tokens. We use spaces that are wheelchair accessible and nut-free, scent-free. We work with a peer support worker at each workshop, so there's always somebody on hand who, if somebody's triggered, if somebody needs some emotional support, either during or after the workshop, there's someone there that they can get that support. The fact that all our staff and our instructors have lived experience, I think it helps to break down hierarchies. It helps us to cultivate empathy, and to really build a sense of community, like the sense that Inkwell is something like by us and for us. And the project that we're all doing together is to build mad literary community in Toronto and to really build mad literary arts. I think the main thing that I try to do in terms of being trauma-informed is to make everyone in the room feel seen. And again, wherever I'm teaching, it's like that's the main thing, is just like, I see you, I hear you, I value you, I appreciate you, I'm glad you're here, and what you're contributing is important. It's so disempowering going through the mental health system in so many ways. There's so many ways that people are told, this is what you can't do, or this is what you'll never be able to do, or this is what your symptoms are, and we're going to give you this medication to, ameliorate your symptoms. But actually being in a space where you're like, you have stories to tell and your voice is powerful and what you're doing is really awesome, I think is incredibly powerful. The other value is choice and control. So we never make people do anything that they don't want to do. And I keep that pretty consistent for my classes in an academic environment as well. If somebody doesn't want to write, they don't want to write that day. If somebody doesn't want to share, they don't want to share. Their participation is voluntary, and they really have choice and control over what they do. So we're just always sort of really conscious in everything that we do, that it's safe, that it's predictable, that we are trustworthy, that we're acting with integrity, that they're never made to feel ashamed. I think that there's been so many times in classroom environments where I've felt ashamed, and we're really trying to not have people feel that way as much as possible, because ultimately it's not conducive to learning, and it's not conducive to creativity. Lindy used to take us to the zoo in Mitchell Park. She'd thump down on one of the benches meant for her kind, slip her feet from their rubber sandals, and fan herself with a magazine. If there were other children, she'd talk in her clicking language with their nannies, and we were left on our own. Our mother tells the story of how, when a huge gray bird seemed to think I wanted its babies and swooped and clawed and pecked me, someone else's nanny had to step in and drive it off. I needed 6 stitches to sew my scalp back up. Everyone said I was a brave boy because I hardly cried. That night, from the top of the stairs, we saw Lindy, head low, having a talking to from our father in the entrance hall, and by the end of the month she was gone. She left her pale pink uniform folded in her kaya at the bottom of the garden. Dreams where the uniform floated around the house made me wake up yelling for her. Lindy still didn't come back. Our next nanny was gap-toothed and lazy, always giggling over the gate with her boyfriends. And finally, Lindy did return to us, walking sway-hipped and proud across the garden again with a basket of clean-smelling laundry on her head. I've been working on a collection of short stories for a really long time. The short story collection is called All the Shining People, and it's a collection of stories about Jewish South African immigrants to Canada, much like myself. And with that project, really wanted to explore my own background and what it kind of meant to have been born under apartheid. I really wanted to explore what that meant, and I really was interested in exploring what it means to kind of be Jewish in a white supremacist society, which, you know, Canada is also kind of founded on just wanting to understand, because of course Jews didn't used to be white, we've become white, and we've adopted and sort of taken on a lot of the benefits of white privilege, and yet there's a disconnect. My uncle and my grandfather were both judges in apartheid South Africa, and I was always really interested in what that would look like to be upholding this kind of white supremacist apartheid law when you're a Jewish man. What does that mean, and how do you reconcile that? Then I was interested in the ways in which Jewish people in the diaspora, we kind of live imaginatively in Israel a lot of the times, or we're taught to live imaginatively in Israel. I mean, I grew up going to synagogue, and we prayed towards the east, we prayed towards Jerusalem, and always, you know, at the end of every Seder, at Passover, say, you know, next year in Jerusalem, and, you know, things like that. There's just a way in which the religion itself is oriented to that. And then, so I was interested in that, and then I was interested in learning about really Jewish South African identity, because I felt like I knew so much about Jewish identity growing up, and I didn't really understand what it meant to be South African. What did it mean to be a white South African? And it was really through the research and the reading that I did in this project with, first of all, understanding what it meant, and second of all, understanding why I didn't have a conception of that. Something that I read, for example, is like there's a insult in Afrikaans called soetpeel, which means like salty dick, salty penis. And the idea is that English-speaking South Africans like are so oriented towards like Europe and are kind of living imaginatively in Europe that they would have one foot in Africa and one foot in Europe. And so their legs were spread so far apart that things were dangling into the ocean. I thought this was great. This was a great way of sort of describing this predicament. My family is very English, sort of more English than English, more British than British, because of this kind of colonial South African identity. And yet we're not actually British at all. You know, we're from the shtetl, right? Like my background is Eastern European. So I was really interested in this idea of kind of, centers and peripheries geographically. And that was really where, like, wanting to capture a sense of place. Again, where you live in your head, where you imagine yourself living, where you imagine yourself belonging, and where you actually are, and exploring some of the disconnects there. Soon Uncle Noah and Auntie Cheryl took our cousins Sam, Rachel, and Levi